Hello and welcome everybody to our Just Planet webinar. Today, I would like to show you some best practices of automatic finite scheduling. But before we start off, just some little upfront information. This is a GoToWebinar. All of you attendees are automatically muted, and that is due to optimizing the quality of audio. However, if you guys have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask either via the chat box here in the GoToWebinar panel or just directly write an email to me or my team. This is Elmar Karlovic. I am inventor of the Just Planet software and now Vice President Product Management and Scheduling of Netronic Software, which is a Boehm IT company. Okay, so let's look into today's agenda. So actually, I have prepared two use cases for you that I would like to show to you. So like the first example deals with a use case that will be very familiar to most of you guys. So like that is a use case where you have got really a lot of jobs. So over 100 jobs and even more. So too many just, to efficiently manage these amount of jobs if you have got a very dynamic environment and you must reprioritize the jobs pretty much multiple times a day. So like here, I would like to show to you some very helpful strategies in taking care of OTDs in such a use case. In particular, I will show you how you can make use of the functionality to automatically calculate job sequence numbers. Furthermore, I will give you some ideas and thoughts around bottleneck management in such a use case. And last but not least, related to this, also I will show to you why it can make very much sense, to treat non-bottleneck jobs different than bottleneck jobs. Second use case, I guess, is also familiar to a lot of you guys. This is a use case that is manpower related. So that means that most likely the focus of finite scheduling is on manpower. And in this use case, additionally, we have an external approval process. So that implies that you send out a very bespoke quotation to your customer and you are waiting for the customer approval before you actually can start the execution within your own internal facilities. And this external approval process comes along with some extra challenges in terms of scheduling. And I want to have a look in this use case and show you some options how to deal with it. In particular, first of all, I will show to you why in general, when scheduling manpower related jobs, it makes sense to have a closer look into the resource setup. Second, then I will focus on the scheduling process itself, how to master the challenge with the external approval process and come to the two reliable delivery commitments. And last but not least, as a side aspect, I will finally also show you some idea how you can force dedicated start dates within selected stages. Okay, so that's an overview over today's agenda. So let's start off with the first use case and have a more detailed look into that, as I mentioned. So like here, in short, I say it's many jobs. So if I would need to categorize the use cases of our Just Planet customers, then you could easily come to the conclusion it is either a use case where you have got most likely really a lot of jobs and each job has comparatively a low amount of operations, or it is the other use case where we have got really complex, I even would call them projects with very complex routing structures and accordingly a very big amount of operations. But now let's focus on the other side. So like we have got really a lot of jobs and you have got a dynamic business. And this is, I guess, true for pretty much every one of you. So like you get regularly new orders. So that means multiple orders, even on a daily basis, coming along together with the requirement that you need to reprioritize the jobs accordingly. So like you have got like a very dynamic, high volatile schedule. And in such a use case, it is very time consuming, to reprioritize every single job individually, as Just Planet was set up initially. But you need to do, or you needed to do this to come to come to a sufficient OTD and to a sufficient throughput, to a sufficient overall scheduling quality. But now, as we extended functionality, I will show you how you can efficiently make use of automatic calculation of job sequence numbers. And how that works, I will show to you within a Just Planet account. And therefore, let's move over to a Just Planet account. And here you can see the job view of an account. So here I didn't prepare a data set with more than 100, but it's like 50 jobs that we have in here, and it's absolutely chaos, as you can see. So like if we would go to the overall KPIs, then you can see currently we have got 21 delayed jobs. So that's 40% delays, and that's awful. And now you can come to the conclusion, okay, then I'm going to move around these jobs manually, make use of the critical sequence number pass, but come on, this is what time consuming is, right? So, and therefore, we now provide functionality that helps you to reprioritize efficiently. So therefore, what we do is we go into the settings tab and go into the settings dialog. And here we have got the tab job sequence number calculation. And this is currently empty, as so far I did not make use of this automated functionality at all. But if I would like to do so, I need to add a criteria that is taken for calculating the job sequence numbers accordingly. So, and to add this criteria, just add a line. By the way, you can add multiple criteria. So the first criteria will be checked, and if two jobs would show up with the same criteria result, then they go into the second iteration for the second criteria. So here, what kind of criteria we have, the due date, and so on and so on. So let's start off with the due date, because why that? Because like the due date is maybe or was the most requested criteria for such an automated calculation. So when you guys reached out to us before we had that functionality, the due date was the most requested criteria. And now let's do that. So now the job priorities will be calculated based on the due date in that way that the nearer in time the due date, the higher the priority of the job. Okay, so let's first add the criteria. And this is now added, but not yet calculated accordingly. To trigger a resequencing, you need to go to the update section. And by having the criteria added, we have activated this icon here in the schedule section of updating. And if I now trigger the recalculation by clicking, then it will be rescheduled accordingly. Let's do that. And now you can see different picture here, right? So like we can directly see within the KPIs that before it was 21 jobs delayed, now it's 13. So just by taking the due date as a criteria to recalculate the priority of the jobs, we could make it way better. So now from 40% delays, it is now 25%. Actually, good move, right? And it was quick, way quicker than doing all this manually, separately, job by job. But to be honest, guys, the due date, in my eyes, is not a criteria that I recommend you to choose. Why is that? Because, like, let's look at some jobs. So, like, here a job has a due date that is pretty near. But what we also need to have considered is how much capacity is actually requested from the earliest possible point of time until the due date. So it's not all about the time distance, right? It is also to be considered how much productive capacity is requested by that job within that remaining time frame to the due date, right? And therefore, what I recommend to take instead of the due date is following. So let's go back in there. And this is the max buffer. So the max buffer is exactly what I explained to you. It takes a due date also, but from the due date, it deducts the total amount of time of unscheduled capacity needed to come there. So actually we call this total amount of capacity MRCT, maximum required cycle time. This is deducted and the residual of time is taken to prioritize jobs. And we have done a lots of simulations before releasing this functionality. And in the end, in the vast majorities of use cases that we just took into consideration, the max buffer was showing up with the best results. So now let's take the max buffer. First of all, get it into the system, not scheduled yet, but what we need to do is again have a recalculation based now on max buffer. And see here from the due date, we can improve because now it is not 13 jobs delayed, but only 10. So it was not an as big improvement, but obviously the max buffer is showing better results than taking the due date as the basis to automatically calculate job priorities. So from here, looking down into the schedule, looks way better than the chaos up front. But now let's try to get an understanding why we have the delays. So let's try to identify the bottleneck. Therefore, we switch over to the resource-centric view. So looking into the resource-centric view, it is all about, identifying like a damming up phenomenon. And to also furthermore, to help you spot bottlenecks, we have got a dedicated color scheme, which is the waiting times color scheme. Now I apply this color scheme. And with that color scheme, all operations that do have a waiting time are colored in blue. So waiting time means that they are not starting at the earliest possible start date, but they do need to wait for other operations of more important jobs before they can be scheduled. So that's the definition of waiting time. And you have got some orange. This is those operations that have waiting time and belong to delayed jobs. So now if you just scroll down and see where we have the waiting times and where we have got the damming up phenomenon is very easy to spot here. So it's obviously the cutting section, and also we directly can see a reason. So like formerly there used to be two laser cutting machines, and obviously one is taken out of operations right now, and the entire order backlog needs to run through laser one. And this is causing delays, obviously. So now, if it comes to OTD, the best approach is just finding any alternative way of handling the laser cutting. So if you would have even the oldest laser cutting facility somewhere internally where it is very costly, so like and high efforts would come along with getting it going, so the setup cost would be high, even, and it would be way slow, so maybe just 2 times slower as the normal modern laser cutting machine. Here it will be an option, because what happens is, if you reduce the load of the bottleneck, then the entire queue here will benefit from it. So pretty much every additional minute in the bottleneck will affect all jobs that run through that bottleneck. So, and also, if you would just have the opportunity to outsource somewhere, also take this into consideration, not for each and every operation, but for selected ones. So just to give you an example of the impact. So we just go now here and we outsource, outsource and take out this workload out of the bottleneck, and then let us see what happens. So therefore, I am just assigning it from the machine to outsourcing. And as I outsource, I would not need internal manpower. So I delete this, and then let's see what happens. So here directly you can see that the entire queue, is pushed to the left. And with pushing that bottleneck to the left, all the rest is pushed to the left as much as possible. And here you can see, outsourcing one operation has a significant impact. From 10 delays, it is just a remaining amount of 3 delays. So that was like a huge step, even though the amount of outsourced workload is pretty low, I'm sorry. Okay, so for that reason, I highly recommend always to check what really limits your throughput within your shop floor operations. And once you've spotted it, try to think about alternatives of adding additional capacity, either by getting some additional internal facilities running, even if they have higher costs. And second, of course, always, if you have got possibilities to outsource, all to think about, but do not outsource too much. Just select those operations within the time windows where you have the bottlenecks and reduce the load there. Okay, so now going back to the job view, looks different compared to what we had initially, right? So like it is just a few jobs delayed. So now once could come to the conclusion, okay, from here on, maybe I give it a try and, try to calculate critical sequence numbers and to do some fine tuning. Maybe I can bring it down to 2 or even 1 delays. So yes, you can do. But what you also can do is think of which job to take first doing that exercise. And what I recommend is, if you know that you have got some jobs within your order backlog that do not need to run through the bottleneck that you just have spotted, start with these jobs. I call them the non-bottleneck jobs. So here we know that laser cutting still is the bottleneck. And I know that I have a job routing in my system here that doesn't need the laser cutting, and that is my routing number 5. So here, all jobs that were created based on routing number 5, or maybe are still connected to routing number 5, do not run through the bottleneck. So it is a total different category of jobs. These jobs do not compete with the other ones. So they really can take care of any idle times, but they are not fighting against the bottleneck. And therefore, let's spot jobs that belong to job routing 5 or have been created based on it. So what I do, I just spot those jobs created from job template number 5. And here it's 2 jobs. And just for reasons of pragmatism, I gave them a suffix R5. So we can see these R5 jobs, these do not run through the bottleneck. Okay, let's start with these jobs and schedule them individually. And here I recommend to make use of the critical sequence number. Let's start out with the first one. Here we can see that you even can go down to the lowest priority, yeah, without any delays. That is not very surprising, actually. So like what happens is exactly what I explained. You can give it a lower priority and nothing happens because like it is just not fighting against the same bottleneck. But unfortunately, with bringing it down here, it freed up some resources, but these resources could not be used by any other job that is now higher prioritized. So let's do the same exercise with the other one, other non-bottleneck jobs. So we calculate and now see what happens here. So like if I give it the critical sequence number of 31, then it frees up resources for other jobs that needs to run through the bottleneck. And with freeing up these resources, I even get a conflict-free plan. Doing this, whoops, done. Remember where we came from? It was a chaotic plan. And with just, adding the criteria max buffer, having one scheduling or automated calculation of priorities, we could bring it down. Then we spotted the bottleneck. We decided to make just one minor outsourcing step. And last but not least, we spotted the non-bottlenecks jobs to make use of them to make some very little individual scheduling efforts. And here we are, a conflict-free plan. So what I recommend actually is making use of the automated calculation functionality for those jobs that are not super important. So that jobs that are super important. And by the way, also this is true for jobs that have been started. I recommend that you exclude them from the calculation by pinning. Also the super important jobs pin. By experience here, I've seen that is pretty much the 20-80 rule, as I call it. So like 20% you should pin because this is absolutely manageable and all power should be in your hand, if it comes to scheduling those very important jobs. But all the volatile rest, you can leave with a max buffer. This is really saving time and it's powerful. Still, you have got some extra options for individual scheduling, but don't do that in a blind way. So like think about sort of separate between bottlenecks and non-bottlenecks jobs. So like, gain some insights. You get the visibility by making use of our, powerful functionality and the visible approach here. And this insights, use it, to schedule. Do not do these interactions fully blind. That makes no sense. Okay, so that was the first use case. Hopefully, I could give you just here and there little suggestions that you can take over into your daily scheduling routines. Okay, so then let's move over to the second use case. Just to go back, the second use case for short is having the external approval within the job routing. Many customers of Just Planet exactly have that structure. So that implies you're fully MTO, so 100% make to order driven and highly bespoke. So that means that even every single order, every single customer order is bespoke. It's totally different than the other. And this implies that you first of all would have an internal step where you specify what you will do. So you specify the scope of supply. And this goes into an official quotation. And this official quotation is at the customer side, so externally, to be approved. Before you do not get the approval, and the approval equals the official order, you would not even know, what in particular you need to execute. And this is an extra challenge, because after you get the approval, you would do the execution with your internal capacities. So that is something that's really challenging and needs to be mastered, because on one hand side, the customer requests a reliable delivery date. On the other hand, very often the customer's response is just not reliable. So it's kind of a conflict, right? But now let's see how you can deal with that challenge. So what I actually recommend, if you're facing such a use case or a structure within your business, I would recommend that you integrate the external approval into your internal routing. What you must do is then set a deadline with your quotation. So that means, that you, after specification, you hand over the document to your customer and say, okay, if you give me your PO until that and that date, I'm able to deliver by then. But if you do not give me any answer until then, I cannot say anything afterwards, because then I need to reschedule whenever you guys reach out to me again. So, and if there is no reaction before the deadline, then you can set the job on standby to free up the internal resources. So let's now see how this looks in Just Planet. So here I created the use case. And as I said before, that's really manpower related. That's very typical actually with that external approval processes, that afterwards the highly bespoke process is mainly manpower driven. So in my example, I've got 19 workers here and just one cutting process, and I've got the external stage as resources. Also, what is very typical in that use case, if we look into the particular resources, is that different workers have different skill sets, so they are flexible. In Just Planet, this means that one working or worker resource is assigned to multiple resource groups, or skill groups, as I like to call it. Also, what you can see on a very first glance here is that some workers are specialists. So like worker 2 only is assigned to be the one to specify things. And we have got worker 7 who is just foreseen for fabrication. So we have got specialists within the team, and we have got generalists that, jump between the units. And this is also observable on a very regular basis, even independently from the particular use case, that you guys have flexible resource. And whenever you have flexible resource, so like whenever you have got people assigned to multiple groups, then I would like to point out following. If you have got specialists, then always prioritize the specialists within the skill groups higher than the generalists, because we need to avoid that a generalist blocks an operation for the specialist. And this is not only due to quality of outcome, this is also due to throughput. So like you will get a better utilization if you have a higher prioritization within the skill groups for the specialists. Because have in mind the three principles of automatic finite scheduling in Just Planet. So like it is finite forward scheduling first, second, based on an as soon as possible principle, and third, job priorities are considered. Let's focus on the second criteria. It's as soon as possible. So that means that Just Planet is assigning an operation to that resource or combinations of resources needed that can complete an operation at earliest point of time. So it is the earliest point of completion date. And however, if one operation can be done at exactly the same end date by multiple resources, then the sequence number within the skill group is considered. So the sequence number of resources within a skill group can have impacts on the scheduling results. And having understood this, you understand also that then having the specialist higher prioritized than the generalist makes sense. So let's check my use case. So I'm going here then, as a matter of fact, into the resource group view to see. Here again, you see that's really flexible. And we had in mind that 2 and 7 are the specialists. So 2 at the top. Great. Let's look at 7. Oh, look at this. So 7 is second. And as we know, 12 was the generalist. So like here, it is the total opposite. So here, the generalist can block the specialist. So we will change. And to see the impact of change, I will just, have my KPIs here so that we get an idea about the impact of bringing this guy at the bottom here. So he needs to calculate a bit on this use case here. And the outcome is, okay, so like before, it was 2 jobs delayed. I could just moving around this sequence number from the generalist down to the bottom, impacts my schedule in a way that I can prevent a job being delayed. Okay, also the throughput time got better. Let's do the same in finishing. Don't let the generalist block the specialist. And here, again, total same effect. We got a better whip, and the better whip here equals even from one job being delayed. So as a matter of fact, this is just a one-time effect. You cannot do that on a daily basis. But I just want to, remind you, sometimes, accounts are growing over time and you just add the resource somewhere at the bottom, even though it's a specialist. Just if you have flexible resource, just have in mind, double check and ensure that in general, it's better to have the specialist positioned high in the group and the generalist at the bottom. So that's the takeaway message here. Okay, once we have done this initial setup homework, let's then look how to schedule that use case where we have got an external approval. Therefore, let's have a look how I structured my jobs. So we take job template number 1 as an example. And here you can see that I did exactly what I outlined up front. So I have a specification process, and then also the external approval process is pretty much treated like an internal task and is integrated into your routing. After the approval process, the actual execution can start with preparation, cutting, fabrication, finishing. In reality, this list is way longer, but I guess you guys see the point. So you have to make just one big routing that is including all the 3 stages that are outlined, including the approval process. And for the approval process, you need to give it a dedicated time. So here I can not give any recommendation to you because like that is the expertise you guys have best. So in my example, it is 4 weeks here. Or in other words, actually what I did is 21 working days. So that is 21 working days here in duration, which equals pretty much 4 normal weeks. So in my eyes, it would be when you have done the specification, you hand over the quotation to the customer together with the statement. If you approve this within the next 4 weeks, I will be able to deliver. And now it comes to the finite scheduling, because then let's take this first job as an example. Yeah. So like if, or no, let's take the second one, it's better. So like here, the preparation is done and now the approval is given to the customer together with the statement. So like if you are able to approve this, what I have specified here, then after finite scheduling, you see that's the scheduled end date. You give it maybe an extra buffer, maybe not. But then you can say, if I get your approval within the next 4 weeks, I can deliver within calendar week 27. This is it. That sounds very trivial, but the key is that you bring in these external duration as an earliest possible start date for the internal execution of the respective scope of supply into that and derive a scheduled end date. So like here, as this is prioritized pretty high, no worries, no bottlenecks here. But if we go down, then you can see, we are getting a bit more in trouble. And then you just have to schedule. So that is the expected end of the specification. It's then the 4 weeks again, and then here we have got some waiting time, so it's going into the next calendar week here. So this is how you should make use of the of the automatic finite capacity scheduling of Just Planet to master this external approval process challenge. So now, fair enough, you've done the specification and it is green and it's at the customer side and you're waiting for the response. Unfortunately, I had to learn that it is a very or most likely case that you do not get the answer within that time frame. So what to do then? So, and this is what this PO here shows. The approval process is ongoing, and actually the 4 weeks are over and you did not receive an answer. So therefore, what you should do then is, if your quotation is validated, so it is not valid anymore because you got no answer, what you then can do is following. You go into that scheduled job, and from any status such as quoted, ordered, or released, you set it to standby. And with that standby, it means that you will free up these resources here that are currently blocked, because then this particular job moves into the standby category. All the foreseen steps are still in there, but they are not scheduled because you just don't know. You do not even know if the specification will be approved or if you need to restart with the specification. In best case, you get the information, okay, yeah, we can do it. So then you bring it back into the scheduled section, and then it's up to you, where you squeeze that in to block the finite capacities again. But I guess the process is pretty clear. So like, first of all, bring in the approval process into your internal routing. By the way, which I did not emphasize so far, but it's important, that the approval resource, of course, is set on infinite capacities, because as a matter of fact, what you should achieve is having as many approval processes running at the same time, and therefore finite scheduling would make no sense. Yeah, so like that is actually just the length of the duration within the routing that is needed to mark the earliest possible start date, for the following stage 3. I guess that's pretty clear. So once you have that in there, then derive a first delivery date, give that to your customer with a validation date. If you get it up front, even better. If not, set it on standby. Don't lose the structure, don't lose the job. Just free the resources for the rest of your order backlog. Okay, so that was actually the second use case. And before I would like to end and summarize, I've got one additional little use case that is actually independent from this particular structure of use case, but what it's all about. So like here we have got a cutting process, and as we can see on the very first glance, with every job, the cutting process is really minor because that's manpower related, but there is a cutting process, and normally the process here is always less than a day. And now, as we can see when scrolling to the right, sorry, we can see that some of the cutting operations, even they are very, very short, overlap days. Yeah, so like you start at one day and end at the next, and looking into the overall throughput of the job. So like that cutting process is absolutely minor, and it would have no impact at all, if we would get it to manage that the cutting process always starts and ends at the same day, so that it never overlaps any unproductive times in terms of end of days or shifts. So how can I do that? Actually, there is a workaround that I would like to show to you, because what you can do to force dedicated operations to start at dedicated times of the day, you can do following. So let's have a deeper dive here. So I created one resource group that I call the setup. Also, the setup is actually not foreseen to schedule internal resources, just foreseen to force the cutting to start at the beginning of the day. And therefore, I gave it a 30 minutes time slot before each starting of the day that is not overlapping, because like here that is ending at 6 o'clock, and 6 o'clock is the start of the shift. And if I then set up a job routing that has an additional step that comes before the cutting, and that says I have the setup before I go into the cutting, and additionally, if I make a task connection from the setup to the cutting operation itself, then you will force every cutting operation to start exactly at the beginning. So let's make an example. So let me just find one job routing number 1. So here's lots of them. Yeah, let's go for this one. So that is obviously PO 59. Going in there, and before I should show to you what I have done in the job template. So like here, my job routing 4 foresees exactly what I have told you. So I've got the specification, the approval, preparation, that's clear. But before the cutting now, I've got one intermediate step to go to the setup. And this step foresees, of course, the resource group setup, and it has a task connection with cutting to the setup. So that is very important, so that it's always ensured, that the little setup step is always connected with the cutting. And as the setup process, is forced to be at a very early point of time before the cutting starts, we will just directly achieve that every cutting step will then be scheduled at the beginning of the shift. And we just make it that example now for my particular job. Let's go in there and go for routing number 4. Yes. So it reschedules, and then we just double check if this is correct. Here we go. So going to the cutting in beforehand. Oh, it did not. So just checking again if I am. Oh, take it again. Did not take the routing. So now let's go for job PO 58 so that we are not getting confused here. Okay, so here we go. See guys, this is what I expected. So like here we have got the task connection, and with that it always forces to start at the very beginning. So in my example, I started off from that I want to achieve that it's not overlapping. So that is just only true if you ensure that the total duration is not longer, otherwise it's just impossible. But I also had use cases, where like the outsourcing process itself was followed by a physical shipping. So like that a Japan customer just twice a week drives a workload to the outsourcing company. And that was Monday morning and Thursday morning. And to trigger that outsourcing would only take place on Mondays and Thursdays can be done using exactly the same method. So that is also just kind of a workaround I would like to show you that maybe gives you a little idea, to deal with within your own use case. Okay, so then let's sum up. Core takeaways. We had 2 use cases. If it comes to the use case that you have got really a lot of jobs, so then what I recommend is make use of the automated calculation of job sequence number functionality. So here, I highly recommend that you keep the important jobs under your control, exclude from that algorithm, and just do that manually. For the volatile rest, use the functionality, save time. Second, always good to do is trying to get an understanding of what limits your throughput, spot bottlenecks regularly. If you have got like a really dominant bottleneck, then try to evaluate any options, of reducing the workload of that particular bottleneck, either with not as productive internal resources or by outsourcing. And then just do that step by step individually, as long or as far as you need. Very often it's just very little outsourcing to do, to really clear up the workload and have a sufficient OTD. Last but not least, in the same manner, if you have identified a dominated bottleneck, so then it also makes sense, to spot those jobs that do not run through it. And these jobs can be treated different to also maximize your throughput, to maximize OTD. Coming to the second use case, if you have got manpower related jobs and an external approval process between two internal steps, so then it makes sense to integrate the external process into your internal routing, set a dedicated deadline for your quotation for approval. If you do not get the approval within that time frame, set the job on standby. Furthermore, in general, if you are dealing with flexible resources, means that one head is assigned to multiple resource or skill groups. So then it makes sense, just double check, the sorting within the skill groups. And here the rule is prioritize specialists over generalists. Last but not least, I just pointed out, if you want to force dedicated starting times within a selected stage, so then you can interpose a resource group with limited availability but unlimited capacity, and integrate this also into routing and take care to connect the successing task via task connection, to force the according starting time. Okay, so that was the webinar dealing with best practices all around automatic finite scheduling. I hope you guys got some good suggestions also for your use case. And I thank you very much for your kind attention. I underline, if you've got any questions, just do not hesitate to reach out to me either via email, to me or to my team, or you can also make use of social networks. I'm happy to answer all of your questions. I'm happy to get feedback. And with this, again, I thank you for your kind attention. Take care. Goodbye.